Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be back in the Guildhall School, but in a posher studio this time, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, we were not planning to, but that's a very good spontaneous reunion because it's been a while since we could do it.
Yes.
But now we are back with episode 23 of Talk to the Chip.
The Magic 23. And because it's a magic number, we're going to talk about a magic British female composer.
Daphne Oram.
Daphne Oram. Yes, incredibly influential British and female musician, which again is very, very important.
She was the first person to be recognized to make this sort of electronic music efforts in the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
Which she founded the Radiophonic.
She is the co-founder and the first director of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
Yeah. There's a piece that she wrote for orchestra and electronics and microphones, the first piece by a British composer to use those forces. So she was so ahead of the game in so many respects.
She was. I mean, there is so much to talk about her today. And this is a must study composer. And today we are going to talk about the 44 tracks featuring her wide range of works.
Yeah, it's a double CD set called Oramics, 1958 to 1977. And the date of 1958 as the starting point is really significant because that's the year that she left the BBC. So essentially she started at the BBC when she was like 18 years old.
Very young.
Yeah, and she started working, this was during the war, during the Second World War, and her job was to play records of the same piece of music during orchestral performances. So if there was a bomb hitting the place, they could go to the recording rather than
wow.
Yeah, so it was like tough times.
So yeah, when it comes to electronic music history, it's been mentioned many times that women didn't get enough recognition up until recently. Yeah. And those people also include Daphne Oram and Delia Derbyshire, both of whom were active in BBC Radiophonic Workshop. And when it comes to this, one of the things to remind is the reason they were able to work in the studio was exactly about the war, because the studios were not employing women at all. Yeah. But men were fighting for the Second World War, and that's why they could work there. And here is someone who was alive between two wars. And she was not only a composer, she literally, as you mentioned at the very beginning, she literally designed and set up the whole BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
Yes, it's quite an incredible thing she did. But weirdly enough, once she'd made this enormous step, within 6 months she resigned. And she sent her resignation letter to the Director General of the BBC, and she was off. And that's what this collection of recordings is all about, is her work as an independent artist.
Yeah, all tracks are from the post-BBC era, from 1958 till 1977, and this was recorded in her home studio. Yeah. So this is independent from that, because it turns out what she wanted to do was beyond what they were asking in the Radiophonic Workshop.
Well, that was one of the things. But at the end of her time at the BBC was 1958, which was also when Varese and Xenakis and Le Corbusier Poème Electronique Pavilion was in Brussels at the Brussels Expo.
1958.
Exactly, and the BBC sent Daphne Oram over there, and there was performances with pieces by Stockhausen and Pierre Schaeffer. And what was interesting, that this was her exposure really to that whole world, even though she was in some ways more advanced, in at least in technical terms. But she wrote she had to kind of write a report to the BBC about her experiences over there.
Yeah, she got to visit Pierre Schaeffer's and
the RTF
GRM
and the RTF studios as well.
Yeah.
And but she said in the letter to the BBC that her that the style from the European style was very different, because in Britain, the use of electronic music or radiophonic music was always applied. It was in relation to radio plays, or for sound effects, or for basically for Foley and for sound and for atmospheres in plays and in film. And it's interesting, that use of the word atmosphere, because that's the thing. I mean, listening through to this massive collection, it's 2.5 hours, more than 2.5 hours long. It's the what she's brilliant at is creating these atmospheres. You know, there's this sort of often very dark kind of atmospheric spaces that the sound exists in.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's always the thing with her is when it's always recognisable that it's hairstyle. She has something, whatever she's doing, this wide range of stuff. It's always hairstyle, isn't it? It's really recognisable.
Actually, that's among my notes. I exactly wrote the same thing. It's in her style, and another thing I'd like to add is, especially this collection of her records, which we are talking about today, the Oramics. You can see examples example setting quality work for all sorts of works important for electronic music history, the ones that we've been discussing up until this episode, but also the 80s ones. So you can see the music concrete approaches, but you can also see like effects based, like feedback and delay based techniques, use of space, etc. You see all sorts of examples, but in each and every one of them, it's very unique. And you can also hear some musical elements, but also some non-musical elements, very dark ambient elements, and the silence points or quietness, dynamic range, frequency range, etc. In all of them, there are like very good examples that you would easily associate with like encompassing all sorts of techniques we discuss in all of these works. And it is said that some of these works were actually like she was intending to submit them for 2001 Space Odyssey. Don't know the full extent or how many of them she was going to, but then that didn't work out in the end. But what you see is you can hear like a dreamy like field recordings or like the storytelling. And so
that's the interesting thing, is that some of the pieces in this collection, it's a wide range of uses of music, you know. So some of them are just for advertising. Some of them are sound effects for plays and TV and films. And some of them are standalone pieces in their own right, which give them this massive wide range, and I think that wide range is also very English. It's very British. You know, there's because I kept thinking with this, especially with the sound world of this in the period, I kept thinking a lot about Joe Meek, this British producer from the early 60s, who produced. Well, he was very important technically because he came up with a few techniques in music recording, particularly compressors and EQs. And he produced Telstar and some of these. It's all popular music, but it's very much using this much more advanced sound world. And it's a similar sort of character where you recognise the style almost despite the content.
Yeah. You know? That's a very good point. And this is also there's also the aspect of being an inventor. For graphic scores, obviously, Oramics machine. That's one of the things we'll talk about today. But the whole collection is it contains 400 tapes that were explored right after her death in 2003. And sadly, again, this is someone who never got the recognition that she deserved during her lifetime. However, today we have got like a much more like a bigger focus that embraces her, even with concepts like Oram Awards, although I'm not a very big fan of this kind of competitive award focus. I've been nominated for it, didn't win, but...
Next time, I've never been nominated for anything.
It's only for women. It's only for women. This one.
Well, there you go.
But my point is, there's finally some recognition. But I hope that recognition is also done in a way without disrespecting her legacy. Do you know what I mean? Like, because when it comes to this awarding, there is the concept of competition, obviously, but like, well, what would she have liked? What would be her choice?
Well, it's interesting that she has kind of become, in some ways, a feminist icon in music. But when you read her own writings, her own material, there's very little reference to the fact that she's a woman herself.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't has never made a deal out of it. You don't get the sense that there's any bitterness or sense of unfulfillment.
Actually, there is an excerpt also in this YouTube video. Like, there's this contrast. I've been showing that video to my students when I talk about pioneering women in electronic music. And it's the BBC excerpt where Daphne Oram gets a visit. And then when you see the house, it's in a tiny town in Kent, and she looks like an old English lady who's about to make you a cup of tea, and you're gonna sit down for a cup of tea. But then she suddenly shows her eccentric invention and graphic score instrument, and she's very low key about that. I can see. But then when I look at this. And this whole album, like all the pieces have their, as I said earlier, like it encompasses all sorts of movements in electronic music, but also there are aspects of it being dark, but also there's an aspect of humor sometimes.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I was thinking about. It's very British. It's very English. And
Oh, really?
That Joe Meek thing. Because there's, for example, in Germany, you know, despite what Elvis Presley said about there's only two sorts of music, good music and bad music. In Germany, there's two sorts of music.
Okay.
Serious music and entertainment. Okay.
Or religious or secular, you know.
Well, yeah.
Earlier
This is like deep into the kind of mindset of European music. And it has an effect on the funding. It's actually really defined in law that there is serious music and there is entertainment, and that's something we just don't have here.
Yeah.
You know, so there are no gags in Stockhausen. There's no gags in Pierre Schaeffer.
No, exactly.
You know,
and that's why, like, after her studio visit, after you know what you were talking about earlier, she finds out that their music is very electroacoustic, obviously, and she wanted to go more like musical and accessible with those things. But even in that sense, it is quite like experimental, and you can see a very good composer's mind in the kind of shape.
Well, you can hear it.
Structure of sound.
Yeah, you can hear that there's real composer's skill going on. I mean, even with stuff that's on in the more there's the music she did for an advert, for a TV advert, or maybe a radio advert that's on this collection called Tumble Wash.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that one with the... It's very groovy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It would be a very good type of chill out, beat based music.
Yeah,
it's just
amazing. And it's with water sounds, like loops of water sounds, and then this bass line running, and it has this futuristic quality, and then the guy telling you about the product, you know. It's quite bizarre.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like there's that aspect, and also there's a whole piece of the cat purring.
Yes,
and when I look at that sort of music, like the percussion, there's this percussive effect where she was exploring objects in the house.
Yes, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because the range of sounds. Yeah. You know, it's like pianos, cymbals, percussion, and then everything from the Oramics machine. I mean, maybe we should talk a little bit about this wonderful machine.
Also about that. I mean, it was being exhibited in Science Museum in London, but it's no longer accessible.
It was I saw it. It's quite a few years ago, about 15 years ago.
Oh,
now.
You saw it? Oh,
yes,
wow. I wish I could have seen that.
And it's a fascinating thing. I mean, it was in a glass case, which was a bit of a shame. But what's fascinating about it is that when you see it, you see the really, again, it's a very English thing. It's the materials that are used. It's this the frame of it is made from Dexian, which is this shelving system that you see everywhere in Britain, and it's kind of rusty in a very post-war British kind of way, you know, and it's the colour of the cables and everything, you know, it's this old British technology, and very rickety, looks very wobbly, but incredibly complex. I mean, it's essentially very, very similar in concept to the Russian ANS synthesizer.
Oh, actually, that makes sense, because this is like again, there is the optic electronic aspect of it, and it is what would you say, like electromechanical?
It's electromechanical in that it uses a permanent light going to a light sensor, but the level of the voltage that comes out the light sensor that then controls the oscillators, etc., is controlled by the amount of light that's left through from a 35mm film.
Very, very early invention, and that's like she got like fundings and patents to explore that.
She got for the Gulbenkian Foundation at one point, but it's on, I think it's on 7 or 8 tracks of film. And each track of film controls a different aspect of the sound. So it's either the pitch, the filter, the amount of reverb, the sense, the delay. All this kind of stuff is controlled by drawing images onto 35mm film.
So then we can call this Oramics synthesis.
Yeah, absolutely.
That also, you know, in some aspect, because of that, there is also a time-oriented sequencing approach. And if you consider it in that sense, it has some similarities with the modern MIDI sequencers or digital audio workstations, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's
a forerunner of that sort of thing, right?
Because it's so visual. And on this collection, track number 6, Contrasts Esconic, is the first piece that she did, that she released or made public. That was made using the Oramics machine. So
when I look at that track, I've been repeating this, right, with the moments of electronic music. So what does this one encompass? I think what I see is like, I can see like surrealist kind of notation, but also in this one, remember the intro of Poème électronique that we talked about, which is a very important piece of electronic music. You can hear that kind of a compositional approach in this one, which is which you said is the very first composition with the Oramics machine. And there is also this sort of storytelling aspect of it. But for me, like this contrasting elements of the sound, and it's almost call and response kind of thing. It would have been very good to see that in action. Like I've tried to imagine how the light and how the drawing works in that sense, trying to picture that. But this one has that sort of nature.
But it's also very composed, isn't it? In every sense of the word, and it would easily be up there with the works from from Pierre Schaeffer's studio or from Cologne. Maybe not so much Cologne, because it's much more about recordings. There's a lot of recordings of piano in there. Yeah,
because there is a lot of blending going on with the sort of existing instruments, and also let's think about Contact. I think there is a moment in Contact in the middle.
Oh, in Stockhausen.
Stockhausen, yeah. I'm talking about, sorry, I have to make that clear. I'm talking about Stockhausen's Contact. I'm just assuming people will know.
Yes, everyone's listened to Contact.
Sorry. There is a brief moment where he explores Samra in a very slow, gradual process. Where it changes and then turns into droplets of sound. And in this album, I'm noticing, again, another thing that's been encompassed in the electronic music techniques. I'm noticing moments like that timbral exploration, but also lots of feedback and delay. then there's the very good blend with the existing instruments like piano again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's one of the pieces. Yes, Brociliande or Brociliande, or I wouldn't know how to pronounce that.
Oh, that's a very eerie piece. I can't pronounce it.
Very eerie, and it's like 10 minutes long. And that's another thing. None of them are longer than the longest is about 15 minutes.
I mean, some of these are also just excerpts, also like the studio etudes, or the one that's like Rockets in Ursa Major. They have like various parts and sections and excerpts.
But this is quite a long one. This is like 10 minutes. And this seems to be like a real a deep dive into cymbal sounds. So it's based, it's like, it's musique concrète, all about cymbal sounds to start with. And then later on in the piece, she's using sine waves to reproduce the spectrum of cymbals. It's very scholarly, kind of clever thing, And when you're listening to it, you don't notice that it's gone from concrete sounds to sine waves. It's really natural sort of progression.
Also, definitely like these properties of sound, of dynamics and timbre being like presented like a palette, like a nice painting with gradual transitions. And also that particular piece, which I can't pronounce, the BR one.
Brociliande or Brociliande? I must admit, shall I look it up?
I don't know, like, but my point is, like, you were talking about this unique aspect, right?
Yeah.
In this one, this is an eerie piece, but there's also something very unique and, how to say, like a fairy tale, like a storytelling in this piece.
I have to stop you. You said fairy tale.
Okay.
Brociliande, earlier known as Brescialianto Brescialian, is a legendary enchanted forest.
I swear I didn't know about that.
That had a reputation in the medieval European imagination as a place of magic and mystery.
But you see how successful this composition was then, because I didn't even know the meaning of it. That's exactly the things that the feelings it evoked on me. There is this dark ambient eerie thing going on, but there's also that unknown.
Well, mystery and mysticism. I mean, she left the BBC to set herself up as an independent composer. And of course, as it is today, anyone who calls themselves a composer usually has at least 7 other jobs to try, and survive. So she was giving lots of lectures, doing educational stuff, and of course all the compositional stuff for commercial purposes. But she was did a lot of research into the actual nature of acoustics on the brain, on the human brain. She referred to that as mystical Oramics.
Mystical Oramics.
Yes, so she had this idea that there was a kind of mystical extension, that all this understanding of the physics of sound and how we understand sound and the effect sound has on us has a kind of mystical aspect to it.
Oh wow, amazing. I mean, we can definitely hear it in this piece.
And I think in a lot of her pieces you can, and I think that's sort of this overbearing atmosphere that's in all her stuff has this sort of mystical quality to it. Yeah. As this is episode 23, and this is such an enormous and influential composer that we're talking about, this is just the end of part 1, and we'll be back with part 2 in episode 24 with Daphne Oram once again. Everything we refer to in the podcast, we will put as links in the text.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
See you in the next episode.